Greetings, 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 and welcome to day 28. Today we'll complete our 28-day Blackity Black History Month Ancestral Activation for Black Liberation. And today we complete the final week, which this week is about sacred restoration, the tools, resources, approaches, all the aspects that we need to look at as descendants of enslaved Africans across the diaspora in order to heal ourselves and to bring ourselves back to wholeness from the ripping that we all experienced, even though not literally in this lifetime, but generationally, from the transatlantic slave trade and global colonization. And today, again, is our final day. We have made it through 28 days of Black History Month here in 2025, honoring our own personal ancestors, honoring our community ancestors, and learning from them and tapping into that wisdom so that now we have this resource that we can come back to all year because we got a year ahead of us, maybe a few years ahead of us, where we can tap into the wisdom of these ancestors who've been exactly where we are or where we're headed, who have fought all the same battles. We can look to their wisdom and guidance and tap into that to understand how we can move individually and collectively. And today we're talking about and honoring Sobonfu Somé and her husband, Dr. Malidoma Patrice Somé. And we give thanks to both of them. They not only are ancestors themselves now, but they spoke about and taught the importance of ancestral connection or reconnection in our restoration and healing process. So, I am Barbara Ohuninifa. I am an author, a coach, and a speaker, and I work with Black women to help us to remember who we are, to step into that power, to recognize that we are beautiful, to remember that we are powerful, and to be love. First, starting with how to love ourselves again, remembering how to love ourselves. Because these last few hundred years, Black women have been at that intersection of racism and sexism, and it has taken a toll on how we view ourselves and our abilities to self-love, truly, truly self-love. So that's the work I do. If that's something you're interested in, want to hear more about it, learn more about it, definitely click the link in the bio about my one-on-one coaching program and let's talk about it. But even in addition to that, this entire channel, so this video and this series has been about ancestral activation. This entire channel, Beautiful Powerful Love, is about supporting Black women and helping us to return to that place of groundedness and self-love and sensuality and all the things that are naturally us when we are healed. So that means like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things so you can know when we are live or when I have new content that's up and about for you. And I had hoped to be on screen today, given it's our final day in celebration. But you can imagine every day for 28 days. And many of those days, most of those days, I was on camera. Some I was, alternating. We ain't got it in us today. We're doing what we can to be here and also managing our own health and well-being. So I thank you for your grace in that you won't see my actual animated face, but the information is here, my voice is here, and I'm here, and the energy is here. So with that, let's move forward. So we're going to talk about, as always, a little bit of the background and understanding of the early lives of these two ancestors. Um, And, I'll just mention this before we get started because I don't think I created a bullet about this. Yes, they are married, and they were married through an arranged marriage. And I think it's an interesting concept that seems so foreign to us now, the idea of an arranged marriage, somebody else telling me who I'm going to marry and spend my life with, but understanding the context that they both came from, being in the Dagara tribe and the deep spiritual traditions of that tribe and of the families. So it wasn't just, oh, you're going to marry this person because we like them. There was some divination, there was some connecting in with spiritual guides to understand who were the ordained mates for each other in order for them to support each other's work, support each other's destiny, support each other's purpose. So arranged marriage is like the surface level of how they actually came to be. You can say it was written in the stars. So I just wanted to share that as kind of a foundational aspect of their connection, that they both had paths, and part of their individual paths was the intertwining of their paths. So Sobonfu Somé, she was born in 1956 into the Dagara tribe in Burkina Faso. And she was prophesized as a spiritual leader. So her name means keeper of the rituals. So everything in this culture has meaning. The names that they give their children are connected to what their purpose is on this earth. And and they named her that again after the spiritual visions that they saw of her. The elders in the village saw that she was destined to be a bridge between the spiritual and physical realms. She was destined to stand in that gap as a ritual leader to connect the two. She obviously was raised in a very deeply spiritual community, and because she was recognized from birth as someone with these special spiritual gifts and purpose, she was trained early as well. And her whole entire her early life was just steeped in ritual, and that became the foundation of the work that she would do globally. She truly was a cultural custodian that was responsible for sustaining their spiritual practices. And of course, because she had this big future ahead of her, she was initiated into the indigenous wisdom of her people and those spiritual practices as early as childhood. And as I mentioned before, trained by the village elders and spiritual guides and everything from ancestral ritual, divination, and the sacred role of women in spiritual leadership. Her entire upbringing really emphasized the importance and the the importance and the honor and the sacredness of the interconnectedness of the physical and spiritual worlds. That's a core belief of the cosmology of her people. And she learned again the rituals and the ceremonies. And she also learned the importance of community unity. And she learned all of this under the mentorship of elder women. So, another thing to point out about the Dagara worldview is that ancestral reverence and ritual are central to daily life, not just something you do once a week or a couple of times a week. It was daily, it was integrated. And all of this influenced her teaching philosophy. And it was, again, very community centered and based on this active relationship, not only with ancestors, but also with nature. Those two aspects well, there's multiple things that are common, but those two stand out, nature and ancestors, as common throughout all of the African spiritual traditions that are indigenous to our people, honoring and working with the ancestors and honoring and working with nature. These are the things we come from. These are the things that without, there would be no us. And it's integrated into those spiritual systems. So she brought the Dagara spiritual teachings to the Western world. So when she, in the 1990s, moved to the US, she started teaching African spirituality and ancestral reverence and healing rituals. And she worked with communities and helped people reconnect with their ancestral wisdom. She believed that Western society's disconnection from ritual and ancestors was leading to a spiritual emptiness. And so her work was to try to restore that lost connection. So as we've been talking about having been ripped from the continent, having been ripped from our communities, our practices, our families, our culture it was truly a ripping, a spiritual ripping, an energetic ripping. And that's part of the restoration process. How do we reconnect that in a real and meaningful way? And that's part of the work that she did. That's the core of the work she did. And she emphasized that ritual is a tool for healing and personal transformation. Things like grief healing and soul retrieval, and again, ancestral communication, all of these done in community is the foundation of her work. And she believed that personal struggles can be addressed through these group rituals rather than individual therapy. And, her perspective is that true healing required more than personal introspection. You needed those community people to support you, and you needed ancestral guidance to support you. And, I think that is a little bit different. I didn't even go to the next um, part of the slide here as I was talking through that. But, we've been talking about this, and I'm a big proponent of that. This healing process is both individual and collective. And I say that from the perspective of being an African American and seeing the realities that, again, some of the ancestors, like we talked about yesterday, with Dr. Wilson and Dr. Cambone, is that there's part of our psyche, our minds that have been colonized, that have accepted our colonizers or our oppressors or our enslavers' way of looking at the world. And part of that is the individualism. So when we look at coming together in community, we also need to be looking at, in my opinion, and from how my ancestors guide me, how we need to heal in our own individual ways as well. But absolutely, what she taught in the community aspect and the healing and the personal transformation that's needed in that, absolutely. And I think what she did is helped us to understand how we can do that, different tools or ways that we can do that, and with ritual being one of them. So let's talk about Dr. Malidoma Somé. He also born in 1956 in Burkina Faso to the same tribe, the Dagara tribe. And his name means, the Malidoma means he who makes friends with the stranger. Now, this highlights his destined role as a cultural ambassador, bringing African spirituality to the Western society. And it really talked about what his life work would be in healing that cultural disconnection and reclaiming indigenous wisdom. And his early life reflect this colonial attempt to sever Africans from their ancestral traditions. So let's talk about that. He was kidnapped by Jesuit missionaries, and they subjected him to cultural erasure. Kidnapped him, took him, I believe it was to England, forcibly taken at the age of 4, and educated in a Catholic boarding school for 16 years. This wasn't his parents gave him up or negotiated something. They literally kidnapped him to go and colonize his mind, kidnapped him as a child, ripped him away from his people. And he experienced cultural dislocation, language loss. He could no longer speak the language that he grew up hearing until the age of 4 because it was taken from him, and spiritual suppression. Now, mind you, and remember, as we were talking about uh, Sobonfu, their entire culture, their tribe, their people, it was all steeped in spiritual tradition. So from the age of from birth to 4 years old, that was his world. And then they ripped him away from that. That was he experienced personally in his life that ripping and that cultural disconnection as they sought to erase who he actually was, his indigenous identity. And it deeply informed his commitment. And you can see how these experiences, it gave him the real life in his own experience body, the experience that we as a people have experienced. Well, a portion of it, because he doesn't, I haven't seen in the research they're talking about violence, but we know that our experience here, at least in the diaspora, was steeped in a lot of violence. But generally talking about the cultural erasure and that ripping that he experienced. But thankfully, he escaped. At the age of 20, he escaped and got back to his village. He returned to his people. But there had been that ripping, there had been that disconnection. So he underwent a rigorous initiation, various ceremonies, reconnecting with ancestral spirits, reconnecting with his cultural knowledge, reconnecting with his community and assuming responsibility within the community. They did the work to restore his indigenous wisdom and knowledge. And it was years initiation process to bring him back in. And through that process, he learned ritual leadership, how to communicate with the spirit world, divination, connecting with his ancestors, and really integrated or reintegrated himself into the way of life of his people, the way of life that he was born into. It was a profound healing process for him, and it restored his spiritual identity and his community ties. It really represented, that initiation represented a rebirth, and it equipped him to be able to help others heal from, again, the same spiritual and cultural dislocation that we are living today. Our people went through it, and now we're several generations in living through it. So we thank him for that wisdom. Now, he earned, after that reconnection and spending time relearning who he was, remembering who he went and earned some various degrees. So he went to, let's see, he went to the Sorbonne in France and received his, I think it was his master's. He got his PhD at the University of Michigan. And throughout all of this, he blended Western and African knowledge systems. He became a respected scholar, and he taught how indigenous wisdom and ritual could heal modern disconnection and trauma. But because of his educational achievements, he was able to translate Dagara spiritual systems into frameworks that Western minds could access. That was big. That was truly him living out his purpose. So, unlike Western scholars who looked at it separately, who looked at science and spirituality separately, who looked at these indigenous practices as something separate from them because they weren't a part of it, he was able to bridge the gap. And he argued that true knowledge integrates both dimensions of existence, meaning science and spirituality. And we give thanks. He traveled to all over the world to introduce or reintroduce people to African spiritual technology. He led rituals and healing retreats. He authored works, which we'll talk a little bit more about as we go forward, but of water and the spirit that talked about his initiation experiences, ritual power, healing, and community. His writings basically offered practical applications of ancestral knowledge, community building, that he gave us a way to restore ourselves. And when I say a way to restore ourselves, not that you just read the book and you can just do the thing, but an understanding of what was going to be required. It's like all of these ancestors we've been talking about, their work builds upon each other. While the work yesterday was Dr. Cambone and Dr. Wilson was able to identify, measure, quantify, name the disconnect, how connected we were, how connected we weren't, how connected to non-African ideologies we were. The Sabones, I'm sorry, the Somés come through and they ask and give us tools to do so spiritually, and we give thanks. Okay, let's move forward. So let's talk a little bit more about what they did for us, the gifts they left for us, the tools they left for us, the ways of thinking they left for us, and how we can use ritual initiation and spiritual healing to reconnect with who we truly are. I mean, they may not use this phrase, but I'm gonna say they gave us the tools to help us remember who the fuck we are. Just saying. So Sobonfu introduced African ritual as a tool for personal and collective healing. She taught that rituals provide a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds. Now, remember what her name meant and what the elders said. She taught who and what the essence of what she was. She taught that. She conducted workshops and ceremonies all over the world that really taught about ancestral veneration and grief and spirit-led healing. She wrote a book, The Spirit of Intimacy, Ancient African Teachings in the Ways of Relationship. And that is a really practical, it's not a huge read, but a practical guide to integrating African ritual into relationships and community life. In it, she argues that, well, she doesn't argue anything, but she presents that a marriage and relationship is not just between two people, it's the entire community, and the entire community supports that relationship and it helps to strengthen it. And she talked about how spiritual disconnection can lead to emotional suffering, and ritual is the medicine that helps restore that balance. Lots of things around healing circles and grief ceremonies. Because when we think about what we've experienced as a people for the last 500 years, we need to grieve. We need to grieve all of the lives lost in the Middle Passage, on the continent, throughout the diaspora, here in this country, all the way up until now. There's a heaviness and a grief, and Indigenous grief ceremonies can help us to release that as a community. She also, as a part of that, focused on the communal healing. Again, coming back to the grief, unprocessed grief disconnects people, individuals, from their purpose and community. And that is where the grief rituals came in for her to help us to collectively release this trauma and reconnect with spirit. She wrote in Falling Out of Grace, Meditations on Loss, Healing, and Wisdom. And in that, she explored how loss can be transformed into spiritual growth through ancestral connection. And her point is that unlike Western therapy, now bear in mind, her point of views around individual therapy and this Western therapy idea, very different than what some of the therapy and the psychology experts that we've been talking about this week. All of them have confirmed this Western view of therapy and way of looking at psychology and psychotherapy does not include us as a people, does not include the concept of oppression and enslavement and racialized trauma. So her point is different than this Western idea of therapy, which kind of just isolates pain. Her teachings show that healing has to be shared in community spaces so that it can be released. And the grief rituals that she created were structured spaces that allow for emotional expression and enabled healing through vulnerability and ancestral guidance. We need that right now, and we're going to need it even more as we go forward. She also taught that our spiritual technologies, African spiritual technologies, were important, and she actually taught them so that people would understand and actually be able to integrate them. Ancestral relationships are critical in navigating life challenges. I mean, that's what part of what this whole ancestral activation is about. We are facing collective life challenges that we cannot ignore or pretend is not happening. Restoring our ancestral relationships individually and collectively as in community is going to be critical as we move forward. She introduced practices like ancestor altars, water rituals, again, divination, helping people reintegrate spiritual tools into daily life. And I say reintegrate, not that we've ever done it or many of us have ever done it in this lifetime, but it was a part of who we were as a people before the ripping. And so we're reintegrating it, or that's what she taught. Welcoming Spirit Home, Ancient African Teachings to Celebrate Children and Community is another one of her works. And it talks about rituals for birth, death, and life transitions and the sacred role of community, actual true community, not sometimes how we use community these days, which is really more from the perspective of a trauma bond than true community, true support for one another. Again, ancestors. All of it comes down to ancestors. There's a reason why this couple finalizes and solidifies and puts the cap on our 28-day ancestral activation. They are ancestors, and this is the work that they taught. And we give thanks to them. I give thanks to them, both of them. Sobonfu Somé. And she also, very important, emphasized the role, the sacred role of women. Now, if you recall, her training, her mentorship, everything that she received was from the elder women in her tribe. It's not to say that men didn't have a role, but the role of women was not suppressed. It was a purpose, it was sacred. And truly, that women served as the spiritual gateways. Women hold knowledge that sustains families and communities. All you have to do is take a step back without the misogyny, without all of um, the processing and the trained mind and the colonized mind that we have now. Think about there is no one on this planet that didn't come through a woman. Your entryway, your portal to be born, your portal to go from the unmanifested void, or in your system, whatever belief system you have around what happens or what exists before you're born, whatever that is, you can't get to this earth unless you come through a woman. That in and of itself, just logically, women are spiritual gateways. But it's more than just giving birth and having children. It's a symbolic, it's an energy. It's spiritual. So her books emphasize that the importance of women's wisdom and intuition and ritual leadership is necessary for community healing. Again, putting a cap on everything that has been coming up over these last few weeks about around centering women, centering women's leadership, centering women's voices, listen to a Black woman the first time. All of these things have been clarified and verified in various modalities and various topics and various themes in various sectors. It all comes back to that, honoring Black women's leadership, honoring women's leadership. And I say Black women because that's who and what we're talking about today and on this channel. So her work was about restoring that understanding that women are key spiritual anchors, healers, and caretakers of ancestral wisdom. And we thank her for that. She demonstrated, she lived it, she taught it, she wrote on it, she left knowledge and wisdom for us to tap into. And Dr. Malidoma Patrice Somé, we give thanks. He is the author of some incredible foundational texts that bridge African and Western spiritualities. As I mentioned, of water and the spirit, ritual, magic, and initiation in the life of an African shaman. And in that, he talked about his initiation journey. And I would say look and do some, you can start off in Google and then go find the actual books elsewhere. But all of his books, and this book in particular, serve as a blueprint for healing. Just by looking through his life and what happened and how he brought himself or his community brought him back to wholeness. And it shows how initiation rites, initiatory experiences can help us restore cultural identity and spiritual connection. Now, that doesn't mean just go run and find somebody that can say you're initiated. It's a process. As we discussed, His was multiple years. It's not a thing that can happen overnight. It's not a thing that just requires more capitalism to make it happen. Spirit gives no F's about how many thousands of dollars you want to put down on it. An initiation is initiation, and it's a process. It's a ritual. And that was part of what the wisdom that he left behind, and understanding that part of that reconnection and that reclaiming involves initiation. And it'll help us to recover from cultural disconnection. He described initiation as a critical process for reclaiming cultural identity and spiritual purpose. And he designed retreats that mirrored the traditional rites of passage and guided people through modern day initiations. Now, his own initiation journey, which he talks about in the book, was rigorous. But because he had an understanding of Western culture and education in Western world, he was able to translate some of those initiation rites so that they could be more applicable in modern day and Western life, but still as powerful. His life becomes and has become a model of how we can reclaim our indigenous knowledge, reclaim who we are after this colonial displacement. And we give thanks to Malidoma Somé. Now, again, he was highly educated with his PhD in political science and literature. He was educated at the Sorbonne in France and here in the United States. He was able to create accessible frameworks for those in the West to understand Dagara cosmology using Western therapeutic models. In The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Finding Life Purpose Through Nature, Ritual, and Community, one of his works, he explains how African spirituality provides answers to modern crises of identity and purpose. As part of the reclaiming of who we are, reclaiming and restoring that ripping of being taken from our continent, our people, our culture, and the ripping that continuously happens and has happened over these last 500 years. Again, I say 500 because I'm counting Brazil. They were taking slaves there. They were taking enslaved Africans to Brazil 100 years before they came to North America. So we're all one. I'm counting the whole 500. Um, and because of his education and his understanding of both sides, he was able to bridge that gap, cross-cultural understanding, where he could highlight how African rituals can help us here in the diaspora with our psychological and spiritual crises that we were in. And combining that wisdom with the academic rigor, he was able to demonstrate this knowledge and again make it accessible to us. And we give thanks for that. And uh, and I just think it's amazing how spirit works, because he literally experienced it himself in his own lifetime, because he was kidnapped at 4 and separated from his family and lost his language, lost everything. When he escaped and went back, he had to reclaim all of that. But it wasn't something that he did on his own. His community helped him. They initiated him. Everything he went through for several years was reintegrating back into who he truly was. So then to go get educated so that he could communicate all of that to the outside world, to the Western world, having literally had the lived experience himself, that is so invaluable. And it's amazing how spirit works, that he had the experience he needed to have to do what he was born to do. And sometimes that can be a hard pill to swallow for some of us, myself included. Like, dang, did I really have to go that? Yes, he had to go through what he went through so he could be the gift for us that he is now and the works that he has left for us. And we give thanks for that, and we give thanks to Spirit and his ancestors. But some of the things he talks about in this, in that again, is just bringing it all back together, and that leads us further into these transformative ritual gatherings that he created to help us restore this ancestral memory, this cellular memory. It's rituals that are really sacred acts that help us bring back that harmony between humans, nature, and the spirit world. He really looked at the rituals as tools for decolonization to help us to restore that loss. And he hosted multiple day retreats where people could engage in these rituals like fire rituals and drumming ceremonies and spiritual cleansings. As I even say the words, I can even just feel the energy of that and how powerful that was. And he helped people recover lost ancestral memory. And we give thanks for that. And so, again, these ritual frameworks were a way of a means of cultural survival and psychological liberation, just like we were talking about yesterday of decolonizing the mind and all of the tools that Dr. Cambone and Dr. Wilson created for us. And all of the others that we've talked about this week in Sacred Restoration, all of them are tools to help us liberate our minds and tools to help liberate our spirits. And there's different techniques and methodologies and things that we can do. And sometimes there may be different things required at different points. Maybe you healed one level of it, but now you need to go a little deeper and you need new tools. You need different techniques. The thing is, we have the beauty of all of this ancestral wisdom that we can tap into to truly liberate ourselves from the inside out. These are things we can do while all of the things are happening in the world. Start the process of liberating ourselves from the inside out. Then we can know what moves to make, what decisions to make, what things to do, what action to take in the external world to deal with what's happening. And I'm not saying it's a linear process. Nothing truly is. Nothing organic is linear. These things may be happening in and out, spiraling all at the same time. But the point is, you cannot neglect your own internal liberation and truly knowing and understanding what it means to be free spiritually, mentally, economically, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, politically, and all of the different tools and aspects of what that actually means. And again, we have ancestors who have done their entire life's works in every aspect of liberation that we need. We just have to tap into them. We just have to study them. We just have to know and understand what they are and then tap into ourselves to see what aspects of it resonate with us. Many of us, most of us, were not raised in communities like the Somés were, where their elders knew who they were, knew what their destinies were, named them so they would be reminded of that destiny every time someone called their names, trained them from early ages to give them the tools and the expertise that they would need to fulfill their destinies, including Malidoma being kidnapped. That was a part of his training to do what he was here to do. His ancestors knew, spirit knew. It was all part of the process. And we give thanks to both of them and their ancestors and their ancestors' ancestors and their lineages for supporting them, for following through, for being obedient, for having the courage to do what they did. We give thanks to Sobonfu Somé and Malidoma Patrice Somé. So let's go forward. So what's the wisdom? No, forward, not backwards. So the wisdom, let's talk about the wisdom. Sobonfu, her work again, grief and community unity, working through that grief through community, working through many things through community, and the really truly importance of that with ritual. And if you were to summarize her wisdom, it would be when you have a ritual, you have a roadmap to healing, and ritual grounds you in a way that nothing else can. And the question is that I think people can look into and understand is what do we mean by ritual? You know, I used to smoke. And when I smoked, there was a whole process I went through to prepare to smoke. Emptying out the black and mild, taking the inner paper out, then putting the paper, the not the paper, but the tobacco back in. It was a whole process. It was a whole ritual. Not a positive one, not one that needed to continue, and it did stop. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But the idea is a thing that brings comfort, a set of protocols, a set of things that you do that create comfort. So when we think about these ideas, rituals as tools for healing and spiritual alignment, which is at the foundation of the wisdom that she leaves for us, the idea that healing is a communal process, if we're going to break down her wisdom into these tangible aspects, and not an individual journey. True healing is a communal process. And as I said before, Western individualism, isolates pain, but we have tools to work on our own individual journeys as well that are different than what she had exposure to, because all of this was happening at the same time. We had Dr. Cress Wellesley and Dr. Ani and Dr. Cambon, all of these brilliant minds, and there's a few I didn't name, but we go back and look at videos, past videos from this week. But these brilliant minds that decolonized psychotherapy, that decolonized psychology, and moved away from these Western ways of looking, these European or Eurocentric ways of looking at it. But ultimately, the true healing, the full healing, the mass healing is a community process and ritual and shared experience, because what we're experiencing right now is a community experience. We're all experiencing it at the same time. Now, we all have individual versions of the things that we are experiencing, the trauma, the grief, our own lives. But as a whole, the concept of oppression, enslavement, racialized capitalism, imperialism, you experience those in community, in groups of people at the same time. So the healing has to come back to the groups of people. Her point is that we heal best when we allow the community and the ancestors to hold space for our pain and transformation. And the idea that ritual is essential for spiritual balance and well-being. Our culture, Western culture, has lost the ritual, or rather, they ritualize things that are negative. And the idea of rituals that connect us to spirit or ancestors or natural forces, meaning, the sun, trees, plants, animals, we don't dominate them, we can connect with them. We can balance humans, nature, and the spirit world. And her teachings, her wisdom and lessons is that ritual can help us to do that. And finally, the big takeaway, well, not the big, but y'all know it's big for me. Women are the spiritual anchors of community. And we know that. We don't get the respect for it. We don't get the acknowledgement of it. We don't get the leadership, the true leadership that we bring to community is not acknowledged, or at least it hasn't been. We pray that that changes moving forward. But Black women have always been that. In any space of spirituality we show up in, we are that. And in traditional African societies, women are the gatekeepers of wisdom, healing, and spiritual leadership. Just like we are here, just not acknowledged. And I'll say traditional African societies, again, not the colonized African societies that have taken on patriarchy as if it was their own as well. Mama Somé empowered women to reclaim our spiritual roles as nurturers, protectors, and conduits of spiritual and sacred knowledge. As I said earlier, nobody on this planet can get here unless they come through a woman. You can't get born unless you're getting born from a woman. That in and of itself, we're the gateway, we're the pathway, we're the portal. That is a sacred spiritual position to be in, to be honored with, to be revered in, that modern Western European society has completely moved away from and gone the absolute other direction. That has to change. But we can do it bit by bit, community at a time. And that ties into the I understand more and more why I'm called to do the work that I do, because in order for women to be revered and be in a position in our words and our leadership and our contributions and our spiritual gifts and all the things that we bring as Black women to be honored, we first have to honor it and recognize it within ourselves, because we've been hurt for generations upon centuries. And there's a healing that has to take place within us so we can remember who the fuck we are. So, Dr. Malidoma Patrice Somé, his whole work, if I had to bring it down to a phrase, is about bridging that indigenous ritual and modern healing, which he lived. His whole lived experience gave us that. He looked at the world. If you summarize again, this is not an exact quote, but the world behind the world is where reality begins. What is visible is only a reflection of the deeper spiritual forces shaping our lives. And that, I could put up a picture here of that famous picture that, be up in office break rooms of the iceberg where you only see the tip of it, but underneath it's a whole other world dimension mountain worth of ice underneath it. That's essentially what he's saying, is that what we see with our eyes in the physical world is only the entry point, only the visibility of what we see with our eyes. But the actual animating force behind the world that we see with our physical eyes is much bigger, much deeper. And that is what is truly driving the thing, by the thing, the reality. And, I'm reminded that that's also the reason for tapping in with our ancestors throughout this 28 days, is the reality that is being attempted to be created around us. It is, we can see it. It's happening. It's not about ignoring that it's happening, but it's having that understanding also that there's something much bigger that we can actually work with and influence to help guide things in the direction of light and love, using whatever spiritual energies, practices, ritual, like we're talking about with these ancestors, using all of that, connecting in with our ancestors, learning, growing, expanding, deepening, healing, bridging that gap between where we've been as a people before we were ripped from the continent to where we are now. All of that can be influential in not only surviving whatever's ahead, whatever's happening, all the things that are happening, but thriving beyond that. We talked about, listen, we need to start working on, if we haven't already started working on, our own Project 26 and beyond, Project 2026 and beyond, that deeply goes into our spirituality, our ancestors, and all the things and how we move forward. So, how do we break down uh, Dr. Somé's wisdom? Initiation, decolonization, and cultural sovereignty, bringing it all together. He looked at, again, this idea that our mental and emotional struggles is because we're disconnected. And he can stand on that because not only education, great, the Western education, but he literally lived it. He felt it. What kind of pull do you have to have at the core of your being to, at 20 years old, escape your captors, where you have been for 16 years? Since he was 4, he had been there. And he escaped and found his way back to his people. What kind of courage and determination and knowing that something was missing, even though he was only 4 when they took him. So he lived that. So he can truly say and again, having experienced it, that a lot of the mental illnesses, the anxiety, the depression, the things that we are dealing with right now here today, every day, and even more people coming out of the pandemic, anxiety and depression and other mental issues. And now it's going to increase even more because look at the trauma we're all experiencing right now. And so his point is that all of that has resulted from people being disconnected from their ancestral roots and spiritual purpose. Now, I don't know what kind of ancestral roots the people that are making these decisions that harm humanity have, but they definitely have a disconnect from any type of spiritual purpose. And I think maybe if we want to do the due diligence of understanding what we're dealing with, those people, look to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Look to Dr. Mariba Ani. Look to Dr. Cambone. Look to Dr. Amos Wilson. We talked about and honored all of them this week in Sacred Restoration. They all presented and shared ways of looking at what the hell is racism and where is it coming from and why. And when you understand what you're actually dealing with, your strategies are going to be different. And at the same time, understanding yourself, your strategies are going to be different. But Dr. Somé his work was about initiation rituals, spiritual retreats, nature-based healing practices to restore our connection. Again, looking at initiation as a way to repair that ripping. Spiritual disconnection is the root cause of our suffering, and reconnecting with our ancestors and traditions is the cure. And his Western knowledge, and again, that indigenous wisdom, he exemplified it, and it's a wisdom that he left behind for us. We are unique in that we have born and raised, those of us in the diaspora, descended from enslaved Africans. We have an understanding and a knowledge within this Western culture, the Western society and education system. As long as we can separate and understand it, that it is a Western ideology and way of looking, but we can understand it. We do it anytime we code switch. But there's an indigenous wisdom that we have to reclaim and gain and integrate the two. That is part of what is unique about us, in that we have both aspects of that, just as he had both aspects because of his early life experience of being kidnapped, much like we were kidnapped. So as a scholar and a Dagara spiritual teacher, his point and what he proved is that African traditions can hold and do hold knowledge that are just as sophisticated and valid as Western science. That is where he looked at spirituality and science as fields that need to be integrated, that actually are integrated. It's just a European point of view has separated everything like they separate a body. His books really bridge that gap between academia and indigenous spiritual systems, and we give thanks because it enables us to not only understand it intellectually, but then to apply it and experience it somatically. And again, we give thanks for that, that we understand and we need African wisdom and this education that allows us to interact with other cultures with this, I won't even say, well, it's the dominant culture. They're just not the majority people. What we have and how we can integrate those two is a strength that we can tap into. And then again, coming back to initiation, this was another component of his wisdom that he leaves. Initiation is necessary for self-discovery and life purpose. In African traditions, people undergo initiation ceremonies to transition into new stages of life. I don't know, we graduate from like 8th grade and we graduate from high school. Like that's the extent to which it's integrated in our society here, and it's definitely not based on anything spiritual unique to us as individuals, like understanding what our individual paths are. All of that is indoctrinating us into the system, into this capitalist system, racialized capitalist system. But what he's talking about and was a proponent for is initiation to reconnect us, and this idea that in African traditions, different initiations happened at different life stages because you need different things. You're growing into different things. You're the same person, more or less. Life changes, things change, but you're spiraling up. You need different things. You need more tools. You need more insight. And his point is we need to reintegrate that to our lives. And with that, he did modern initiatory experiences that helped people undergo this transformation that we needed. Not necessarily the same things, because we don't live in African tribes in the 1950s or even in the 1800s or the 1700s. We're not in that society. So he modernized the rituals and the initiation experiences um, to work with the Western people, to work with us in the diaspora. And his point is that without initiation, people remain lost, and that we need that. And what's unfortunate is that because there's colonization of the mind has taken place both on the continent and here, you have a lot of predators that will talk about initiating people, and they're not even equipped to do so. They're not even initiated themselves, but it's a money capitalism making has turned into an industry, which is why it's important to connect in with your ancestors, with your own higher self, so that you can be guided to where you need to be guided to work with the people you need to work with that your ancestors have deemed appropriate. Your honorable ancestors who know you and love you, that we went through a whole week, the first part of this 28-day activation of working with sacred lineage. They are your first line of defense. They are your first blessings. They are the ones who have a vested interest in your growth, your healing, and your development. So we go to them first, and no one can establish that relationship with them for you but you. And once you establish that relationship, then they will open the doors to let you go further in that. It has to be in that order. Otherwise, you're susceptible to getting taken advantage of, to getting all your money taken, to going through processes that aren't real. And also, in and of yourself, to feel like you're initiated, to feel like you're doing a thing. People be out here talking about they initiated or they've gone through things that they have not, just straight up lying. Again, it's the mind being colonized, and they're emulating our colonizers, our oppressors, doing all the same things. But in the name of our ancestors, in the name of those who lost their lives in the Middle Passage, those who jumped ship to die rather than be a slave, the mothers who took their own lives and those of their children because neither of them were going to be enslaved, because they understood that there was something else, or they just were not going to go through the suffering that they were going through. So to make things up, to lie, to fabricate based on what the oppressors who actually caused all that pain and grief have taught us desecrates the legacy, the meaning, the lives, the memory of our ancestors. That kind of spiritual imbalance cannot go on unchecked forever. That ain't how the universe works. That ain't how any of this works. Now, granted, we may not see the things in our lifetimes, but the concept of time is, it's a construct. How long things take for things to balance out in spirit, it's a blink of an eye. What might be 2,000 years for us. So the Somés, an incredible, powerful union of individuals who each had their own destinies, identified by their elders in their communities, named, given names based on their destinies, given experiences to support their destinies, giving community support to support their destinies. Marriage arranged so that they would come together to support each other's destinies. And they did it. If I may say, they did the damn thing. In theory, in books, intellectually, and actually practice, initiating people, healing people, And when I say healing, not, oh, I'm going to lay hands on you and heal you. They led people through their own healing, which is far more impactful because then you know how to do it yourself and you can pass it on. So we give thanks to Sobonfu Somé and Malidoma Patrice Somé for the work that they have done, for the wisdom that they have left, and for the gifts that they have given us to help us to know another way, another aspect, a necessary aspect of us restoring ourselves as a people, individually and collectively, which collectively, community is the end goal because individuals can be okay. If the community ain't okay, we ain't none of us okay. So let's talk about, we're almost to the end. I just want to summarize the three big points of what we can do with all of this, summarizing it across both of these esteemed ancestors. That we can revive our ancestral rituals in daily life. Again, it's not a once a week, I'm going to just do that on a Sunday, or I'm going to just do that once a month. It's daily. It's integrated in how you move, how you breathe. You drink water, you connecting with your ancestors. How do you do that? And what do you ritualize? And again, ritual is a word that can have all of these big grandiose meanings, but it can be super simple. And whether it's connecting in with spiritual traditions like Ifa, Vodun, or any of the Isheshe, or even the diasporic versions or aspects of these root practices like Lukumi or Santeria, any of the things that bring us back to Akom, which we talked about on a few days ago, a video a few days ago, any of these African spiritual traditions, all of them have various different ways of connecting with ancestors, ancestral rituals. And whether you actually go into them and like practice them, but we can look to them to see how did our ancestors practice ancestral veneration? Because all of them included an aspect of ancestral veneration, but it may look slightly different or even a lot different depending on which practice it was, meaning which part of that West Coast we were from, which tribe they were from. And how we can apply that is creating small rituals. Maybe it's lighting a candle and saying thank you. Maybe it's doing something in nature and saying thank you. You getting the pattern here? This is gratitude. Because it ain't no you without them. Give them thanks for that. Elevate them. Call their names and elevate them. And the idea of marrying the indigenous with the modern, bringing that communal healing practices into modern mental health spaces. That reminds me, I still needed to share a link to a list of therapists who are open to, or even themselves potentially, practice African spiritual traditions. So their understanding of the broader world, the decolonized mind, the non-Eurocentric way of looking at mental health is present with those. So I'll remember to post that list. Listen, it's been 28 days straight. It's just tired. But these more therapists are starting to look at that. More therapists are starting to take their Western education and training and apply indigenous practices and community practices to that training to make it relevant for us. Because the Western view, the European view, did not take into account and would not take into account oppressed people because they're the ones doing the oppression. The psychology process is meant to continue it the way it was created and is taught in Eurocentric terms, as we learned yesterday with Dr. Wilson and Dr. Cambone. Group therapy and community grief rituals can be used as an alternative to the trauma, to the being re-traumatized, and sometimes in therapy sessions where it's just I've heard horror stories and have seen horror stories of therapists that just don't understand Black folks, people of color. They're like so steeped in their bias and have nothing that they can even do outside of that. So that makes the process of therapy can even be traumatizing. But that does not mean don't go. That does not mean let it go. That means do the due diligence to find the right one. And also, mental health therapists, in terms of applying it, this wisdom today, can incorporate ancestral practices into therapy and into wellness. One of the best therapists I had was one who understood um, that ancestors exist. So when we talked about things, we talked about and included that context. And then the other thing that we can do is reclaim our African spiritual leadership. Again, the African-centered education, the Pan-African spirituality, traditional healings. We can look at all of that and bring it back and bring it in and integrate it and apply that specifically by creating spaces online, in person, where people can come together and African traditions are studied, practiced, passed down, and not in this rote, check the box type of way, because that's still operating like a colonizer. That's still operating in this Eurocentric point of view. But really thinking about how can we heal our people? How can we come together and heal together and look at all of these resources, frameworks, and models, the ancestors that we've just talked about this week and beyond, because there's even more. It's not like I covered everybody. Over these last 3 weeks, we've talked about 44 ancestors who've done work either as a sacred shield, sacred resistance, or sacred restoration. There are thousands who have done work in these areas in different ways. We only have to tap into that wisdom so we can understand how to move forward. Again, we give thanks to Mama Sobonfu Somé and Dr. Malidoma Patrice Somé and their entire lineages for the work that they have left for us, the gifts that they have left for us, the wisdom that they have left for us. And we give them thanks, we give them elevation, we give them veneration, we give them gratitude. Take a deep breath. I want to thank you for rocking with me and with the ancestors, more importantly, these 28 days. I hope you have received some guidance, some wisdom, some things to think about, some paths to take, some things to go deeper into, about, to learn about yourself, to learn about our people, to be inspired, to not give up hope, to sustain your hope, and to know and understand this. You exist for a purpose. You exist right now during these times for a reason. You have a gift that humanity needs, and that is why you're here. Even if you may not know what that gift is, it's there. Allow it to be awakened. Allow it to manifest. Allow it to expand in your life. And from that overflowing, it'll expand to others in your family, in your community, where you live. It'll expand exponentially in ways you can't even imagine. And your ancestors, our ancestors, they're all standing, waiting, cheering, supporting, protecting, blessing all of us every step of the way. Take a deep breath. We will not be doing a guided meditation today. I want you to refer back to some of the others and even just sit with your ancestors. Sit within this work, sit with the ancestors that really speak to you. and just breathe. Or even better, go out in nature, sit on the ground, walk on the ground barefoot, lean with your back against a tree, and simply breathe. Nature is here to support us, just as our ancestors are here to support us. They're just waiting for you to tap in. And with that, we are wrapping up our 28-day ancestral activation for Black liberation. I thank you. I thank you. I thank you. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, because we have more to come. I think I mentioned yesterday I was gonna have an announcement. And do I want to make it now? Sure, I'll make it. So join us, join me, join us, because ancestors are always popping. Every Friday, unless I need to reschedule a Friday, at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. And we are going to talk about and share and honor, maybe in a slightly different way. I haven't uh, received that level of detail yet, but we are going to work with understanding and inspiring Black women. And this series will be Black Women Are Dope as Fuck. Or more specifically, Black Women Are Dope AF. So every Friday, we will honor and share context, inspiration from a Black woman who was or is dope as fuck. I want Black women to be inspired, to see themselves, to be seen, to feel heard, to have concrete evidence from across the globe of how dope Black women are. So that's my commitment. I'm showing up every Friday. Things will be scheduled. You'll be able to see. So definitely like, subscribe, do all the things so that you can know when we're going live, when there's new content. And of course, you have access to me via the one-on-one coaching, which includes an integrated divination technique that I have developed that includes a few different modalities that I've been trained on to help tap into spirit to understand who are you. And then the coaching sets up, is based on what we've discovered in that and talked about, and sets up from there. So we can talk more about that, and also do that as a one-off. So there's the coaching, then there's the books. If you look at Remember Who the Fuck You Are, and the videos that I'll continue to post here on YouTube. So if you use, and the book itself, the workbook, it's an activity book and journal, also includes an online community that's off of social media. So when you look at the book and the exercises and the workbook pages, activity pages in the book, the online private community that's connected to the book, and the content, video, meditations, and so forth that will be here on YouTube, you have an extremely low-cost, self-paced course, not even just a single class, it's a whole course. And that is with intention, because I want women, Black women, to have access to this information to heal themselves. Then you have the one-on-one coaching, you have the book, you have my first book, From Fat, Black, and Unlovable to Beautiful, Powerful Love. And there's more to come. So now I will wrap it up. It's hard to say goodbye, but I will. But it's not goodbye, it's until next time. And as I always say, it's going to be till next Friday. Until then, take good care of you. Peace, love, and light.